on-time people.
Got it.
Got it. Okay. Any announcements before I get started to our group?
Yeah, I'll make a couple of announcements.
Okay.
So we're having our first general membership meeting of the year for 2023. Going to be on March 29th. And that's going to be a lunch meeting like they normally are. And we're bringing in C.A.R.'s economic forecaster, Jordan Levine, to give us an economic forecast of what's happening in our industry. And that's going to be at Los Serranos Country Club at 11:30, and it's free for our members. And then we're also doing our Angels Night Out again. That is going to be April 21st at Angel Stadium. They're going to be playing the Royals that night. And I believe the game starts at 6:30 or 6 or 6:30, one of the two. And our seats are in the Club All-Star section, and each seat is $50. And then also later this month in February, now that we're in February already, we're doing a John's Brown Bag. And that's going to be from 12 to 2 on Friday, the 24th. It's going to be on Zoom. And this is an opportunity where John Giardinelli is going to be talking about any hot topics that are happening in our industry at this point in time. And it's open for questions. You can ask him whatever questions you want, you need help with. So those are the things that are coming up in the next 2 months. That's all I got.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Laura. I always appreciate your help getting this thing started, and look forward to chatting with your members, or I guess it's our members because I'm an affiliate member here at Mount SAC, with everybody in the group. So today we're going to talk about the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. There have been significant changes to what we've had last year. This is one of the forms that got changed for December. So let's jump right on in. We used to have the buyer representation not for compensation. That's gone. Bang, no more. We had the buyer representation non-exclusive, and then we also had the buyer representation exclusive. So we had 3 forms. Now we only have 1 form, and this is it. And you have 2 options. The default language is non-exclusive representation. However, as I'll show you, if you check the box, that will go into exclusive representation. And here's my thinking. It's no more difficult, I don't think, to get the exclusive representation agreement signed. So that's the option you should go with. Don't go with non-exclusive representation. It doesn't give you the level of protection that you really want. To use an analogy, the exclusive representation is like an exclusive right to sell listing with a seller, and the non-exclusive representation is like an open listing with the seller. What do you want to take, an open listing or exclusive right to sell? Exclusive right to sell, right? So the exclusive representation option is conceptually like an exclusive right to sell listing, except instead of a seller, we're locking in the buyer. Now, as we go through this, I want to invite you to role play with me. We need to role play in the chat because this is a webinar, but I know all of you are interested in using this agreement, and I know many of you, perhaps most of you, are not using it because you're afraid. Let's be honest. You know that the buyer is going to raise some objections, and you don't know how to overcome those objections. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's how we get started with new agreements, new documents, right? I want you to give me those objections as if you were the buyer. And I will show you as the agent how to overcome those, all right? Now, before we get into the agreement, I want to talk to you a little bit about the introduction script. You see, you're going to need a script to present this agreement. And I would recommend doing something like this. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I'm really excited about having the opportunity to show you properties and represent you in a real estate transaction on the purchase of your home. I think helping families get a home is probably one of the most rewarding things a real estate agent can do. Certainly, it's the most rewarding thing I do. And I take my representation very seriously. I take it so seriously, I like to have a written agreement that authorizes me to represent you to the fullest extent. And that's what this agreement does. And it's called the buyer representation and broker compensation form. So I know some agents don't use this form, but I do, because I think representing your interest is the most important thing I can do. And that level of representation is actually known as a fiduciary relationship. It is the highest duty under the law. Now, I have found buyers who somehow think that if they call the name of the person on the for sale sign, that somehow they're going to get a better deal. What they don't realize is the person whose name is on that sign has a written agreement with the seller called a listing agreement, and they're supposed to get the seller the best deal. They're representing the seller. You know, it's kind of like if you're charged with a crime, are you going to ask the district attorney to represent you? No, you want your own lawyer. And I think in buying a property, buying your home, you should have your own agent. And this is what this agreement allows me to do, to represent you, to see that you get the best deal. I hope you agree with me. And then you present the agreement to them. You see, you've shown them a reason to sign this agreement. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get into the agreement. We're going to talk about potential objections that buyers might have. And I'm going to show you how to overcome those objections in addition to explaining what's in the agreement. Now, before we get too far, I need to let you know about agency disclosure. None of you are strangers to this form. The law requires you to disclose agency before you enter into an agency relationship. So with sellers, you have to have the seller sign this form before you sign the listing. And with buyers, you have to have them sign this form before they sign the buyer representation agreement. Now, you should have them sign this before you show property to any buyer, even if you're not using the buyer representation agreement, because the law says you can't be their agent unless they sign this form. Now, this form does not create agency. This form is not a contract. It's a disclosure. But Civil Code 2079 says you cannot become an agent of the buyer until you first disclose the difference between single and dual agency. And that's what this form does. So if you're looking for a script to present this form, it's something as simple as, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, before we start going out and looking at property, the law does require me to disclose the difference between single and dual agency. In single agency, our company will only be representing you. In dual agency, our company will be representing the buyer and the seller. So dual agency could exist if you decide to make an offer on one of our company's listings, and we would have to go into dual agency. I will still work exclusively with you, but our broker would actually be representing both the buyer and the seller. That is the law. That's how it works. This is simply a disclosure that does that. Would you mind signing it? And they'll do it, okay? Because it's just a disclosure. It's not a contract. Secondly, we need to get this possible representation of buyer and seller signed. Now, again, this is going to be the second document your client signs. You need to have them sign this before you start showing them properties. The reason is this form does two things. It says if your office is representing two buyers who are essentially looking for the same property, that's okay. I mean, is that dual agency? No, but it is an apparent conflict of interest. Second, if the buyer decides that they want to make an offer on one of your company's listings, you'll be going into dual agency. And what this form says is the buyer agrees to go into dual agency if they make an offer on one of your company's listings. What you don't want is you don't want the buyer, when they see that dual agency confirmation in paragraph 2 of the purchase agreement, to say, oh, wait a minute, I read somewhere on the internet that dual agency was bad. I mean, if they don't agree to dual agency, you're going to have to refer that buyer to a different company, right? You don't want to do that. So this form says if they have to go into dual agency, they're willing to do so. All right. Now, let me go into the contract, but I see a couple things in the chat. Okay, so what's in the chat is simply Laura's handouts, the handouts for this. I always like to put my email address into the chat as well. I cannot give you legal advice, but if you ever have questions regarding a C.A.R. form or a real estate policy or just real estate questions in general, I'm happy to do that. And the reason I'm happy to do that is I'm here to promote the real estate program at Mount SAC. You know, if an affiliate is giving a program, you're going to get a commercial, right? Well, here's the commercial. You're going to have friends, family, acquaintances mentioning to you at some point that they're thinking about entering the real estate business or getting a real estate license. I'm hoping you'll tell them, hey, you really should take your real estate classes at Mount SAC rather than a home study or a correspondence course. Because after this class, I hope you all agree that someone would learn more in my real estate principles class than they're going to learn from some correspondence course. All right. Okay, so let's now go into the BRBC and go to paragraph 1 and 2. So representation period and duty and right to represent. So we want to list the names of all the buyers and potential buyers. You might have a family member, in-law, something like that, that may be going on title in order to help qualify for the loan. So you want to put them there. Remember, if that space is not big enough, if you just keep typing in names when you're filling this form out on zip forms, okay, the TOP form should attach and it can continue on to that TOP addendum page. And then in the second line, you put in the name of your broker. Now, on that third line, and this is where we're going to get our first objection. Okay, there's two objections to this agreement. There's actually 3 objections to the listing agreement, right? Term of the listing, price of the listing, and commission. With this agreement, there's only 2: commitment or term of the agreement and commission. So rather than having 3 objections, you only have 2 objections, okay? Let me see what's going on in the chat here. Ah, somebody agrees. That's right. Thank you, Bessie. Always nice when people agree with me, whatever she's agreeing to. All right, so this is how I'm going to handle this. The buyer's going to say something like, golly, you seem like a really good agent, Betsy, since you were bold enough to put something into the chat. Betsy, we like you. You seem like a really nice person, but we don't really know you. And we're a little reluctant to committing ourselves to working with you. What if it doesn't work out? Okay, this is how you're going to handle that. We will make this beginning on February 3, 2023, because that's the date this program is being presented, and ending 0 days later at 11:59. So it's only for today. Now, in the old agreement, they had a beginning date and an ending date. So you could begin on February 3 and then end on February 3, 2023 at 11:59. This form doesn't allow you to do that. So after talking to C.A.R. Legal, they suggested to do just that. Put it on February 3, 2023 and ending 0 days later at 11:59. And then in other terms, later in the agreement, put in there, this agreement will expire at or on February 3 at 11:59. So you just give it some clarification language, okay? And that makes it only good for one day. I can't think of a reason why a buyer wouldn't agree for a term of just 1 day. Now, if you don't like 0 days there, you can put 1 day. So it'll end tomorrow at 11:59. But you can even joke with them. You can say, were you planning on going out with an agent later on this afternoon to look at properties? They go, no. Okay, we'll just make it for 1 day. We'll just make it for 1 day. Well, I guess there is an objection. And the objection is something like that, this. Well, our niece just got her real estate license a few weeks ago, and she's been showing us properties, but she really doesn't know what she's doing, and I don't think she's shown us everything out there. We'd like you to go out, waste your time showing us some properties, and if you're able to show us something that we like that we haven't seen, we're going to have our niece write the offer. Can't help you on that one, except you don't want to work with those buyers, right? So what this agreement's going to do, it's going to get rid of non-existent or imaginary buyers, as I like to call them, looky-loos, okay? Let's go down to number 2, no pre-existing buyer representation and compensation. So there is a chance that this buyer has looked at properties with a previous agent, and that previous agent put them under a buyer representation agreement, okay? That chance does exist. Now, it's not likely, but it could. And under that previous agreement, that previous agent could have registered properties with them in the safety clause of that previous agreement. Which means if the buyers were to buy one of those properties, they would owe the previous broker a commission. And if they have an agreement with you, they would also owe you a commission. So they'd end up owing 2 commissions. So the way we protect our buyer there is we will exclude that previous broker and any properties they showed them. And you do that online too. The safety clause written very similar to the safety clause you find in the listing agreement. Now, we're going to talk about that safety clause more. So hold your questions on the safety clause for just a few minutes, because I will talk about it more, and then I will take your questions on how the safety clause works. All right. Moving on. Location of property to be acquired. Okay, so we want to be broad here, but we don't want to be too broad, okay? So under 3A, where it says location, earth, too broad, right? Even California, still too broad. Needs to be a little bit more local, but I wouldn't do it with a specific city like Walnut or Corona or something like that. You need it to be broader than a city. And the problem with tri-counties is you've got 3 counties. Well, I guess you could say Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Orange, Riverside counties. I mean, you're not really tri-counties, you're kind of the quad counties, right? Because you're right there in the hub of all the counties. What you might do for location is put in CRMLS. So any property within the CRMLS jurisdiction, this agreement would cover, okay? If you're working in the San Gabriel Valley, you can put San Gabriel Valley or San Gabriel Valley / Inland Empire. I know a lot of agents do that, okay? But don't do a specific city, because if you put in Walnut and they buy something in Hacienda Heights, then this agreement might not apply. Likewise, with price range, you want to be a little broad, but not too broad. So let's say you have a buyer that's looking for a property in the $800,000 range. Are they going to live in a property that's selling for $400,000, if you can even find one? No. Are they going to be able to buy something over $1 million? No, right? So what I would do there is I would do a price range 400,000 to 1.1 million. They're not going to live in a property that sells for 400,000 and they can't afford anything over $1 million. You know, you don't want to put in there $10 to $10 million. Judge will look at that and say, this is ridiculous. What kind of range is that? Okay, so you want to tighten it up a little bit. And then other, if you want any clarifying language. C.A.R. I think does a good job with their forms, and they try to give you as many ways to do options to your transaction as possible. Under 3B, you can list specific properties only. You might have a buyer that says, look, I want you to represent me in buying that property. I know the property I want. It's that one. Let's get it. Okay. One property. You could do that under 3B. Or you may have properties identified on a list. If you've got a buyer coming out of a 1031 tax deferred exchange, they may have identified their 3 properties. They got to buy one of them. They may give you a list with those 3 properties. Okay, so there's some flexibility here, but typically you're just going to be using 3A, right? Now, the second objection, compensation. Okay, now this always gets a little dicey because any discussion between competing offices about commission can be viewed as a violation of both state and federal antitrust laws. So I want to emphasize what you see there in 10-point bold type, that commissions are negotiable. They are not fixed by law. Moreover, any conversation you were to have with another licensee from a different office, not licensees within your office, because you're all one agency within your office, but between offices, any conversation about what you charge, what you should charge, what other people charge, you're dancing with an antitrust violation. All right. Okay. Now let's go down to 4A1. Now in 4A1, you need to put the percent that you are going to receive or your office is going to receive representing this buyer. The amount under 4A1 would be similar or maybe exact to the amount that when you go onto the MLS and you see the commission that the listing agent is offering you, if your buyer makes an offer that gets accepted, that's the amount you're putting under 4A1. Now, we've all looked in the MLS. We see some of them are what, 3%, 2.5%, 2.75%, 2.25%, 2%, $2.50. They run the gamut, right? Why? Commissions are negotiable. But what do you want? Okay. Do you want 2.5? Do you want 2.75? Do you want 3%? You need to make that decision in consultation with your broker, and that's what you're going to put there. Would you ever put 5 or 6% there? No. I mean, you may put a higher amount in a listing agreement with a seller because you're going to be sharing a portion of that, maybe half, maybe not, but a portion of that with the agent that has the buyer. You're not sharing this amount with the agent who has the seller. This is going to be on the buyer's side. So I hope you all understand what I'm talking here. Now, I will add one further point. Go a little high. And the reason I want you to go a little high is because you may find yourself representing your buyer who is buying a property from a for sale by owner, or maybe an unlisted property, which means you're going to be doing some work on the seller side with getting disclosures completed, paperwork back and forth. You're going to be doing a little more work. All right. So you're going to earn that commission. Now, where it says and a dollar sign, If you want to insert a transaction coordinator fee or TC fee, that's an appropriate place to put it. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about TC fees. Can you charge a TC fee? And the answer is yes, you can. There's nothing in the law that prohibits an agent charging a TC fee. However, I raised this question with a deputy commissioner of the Department of Real Estate. I was at a semi-social function. Actually, it was an educational conference. I know this deputy commissioner reasonably well professionally. This commissioner is important enough that when you look on the DRE quarterly newsletter, their name is in that box underneath the commissioner. So this person's pretty important, all right? Anyway, I asked this person, hey, can you charge a TC fee? And they said, yes, you can, but we are not real thrilled about it. And I go, why is that? And they said, well, we don't understand why the buyer is paying a transaction coordinator when it's really the agent's job to do that paperwork. Couldn't argue with that. It is your job. But I said, there's nothing that prohibits it under the law. And they said, yes, you're right. So we want something special. And I go, what do you mean something special? Well, we don't know, but something special. So if you're charging a TC fee, that TC needs to provide something special. And I go, there's no special mentioned in the commissioner's regs or the real estate law, business and professions code. The deputy commissioner says, I don't care. We still want something special, and so does the commissioner. Okay, we need to give them something special. So what the heck are we going to give them? Well, how about if you take all the paperwork, your TC paperwork, and puts it in a nice binder and downloads all the documents on a thumb drive and puts them together and ties it with a nice ribbon and a bow and maybe some cookies. Is that special? And the deputy commissioner started laughing and she said, yes, that is special. Okay, so that's special. So I don't know what you guys want to do, but if you want to charge a TC fee, just remember, if something should ever go south and an investigator comes into your office and starts snooping around on TC fees, you better have something special, all right? All right, so 4A1, typically what we're going to do, we're going to put in a percent. Or you could do a flat fee under 4A2, that's not very common. Or 4A3, compensation schedule. What's a compensation schedule? Well, again, this agreement is made for a variety of different situations. If you're familiar with commercial leasing, compensation in commercial leasing is based on the term of the lease. So you might have X% of the first year, Y% of the second and third year, and Z% of the fourth and fifth year. Okay. That's how a lot of commercial leases are done. Again, structuring this agreement for a variety of purposes. Now, the objection that's going to come from the buyer is something like this. Wait a minute. I thought the seller paid the commission. Why am I being asked to pay the commission? And this is how you're going to handle it. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you're absolutely right. The seller typically does pay the commission through the listing agent. And as we're going to see later in this agreement, if I'm being compensated from the listing agent through the MLS, which I would be if you decide to buy a property in the MLS, then you're not going to owe anything, because what's being given to you from the MLS will offset what the buyer owes under 4A1. So it's not going to cost you anything. So the buyer says, then why do we have it in here? Well, let me explain something else to you. You see, in the MLS, there are properties that other agents are probably not going to show you. I like to call them entry-only listings. Entry-only listings are where an agent for a flat fee, $500, $1,000, whatever, will put the listing into the MLS, and that's all they do. And they don't do anything after that. They put it in the MLS, and then they offer $2.50 for an agent. And they may add in there, get your commission from the seller. Now, true story in my situation personally, back when my wife and I were about to get married, I made an offer on a property. Oh, actually, I called the listing agent. It was an entry-only listing. And I called them about looking at the property. And they said, just deal directly with the seller. They've already paid me. I have nothing to do with the listing, which is not uncommon with these entry-only listings. So after looking at the property, we make an offer. And as I'm sitting down, and I'm doing direct presentation, I'm making the offer directly to the buyer and seller, or excuse me, the sellers, excuse me, not buyer and sellers, the sellers. And while I'm doing my presentation, I mention about a commission. And the wife looked at the husband and said, hey, George, remember what our agent told us. If another agent brings an offer in, we have to pay him 3%. It was the easiest commission I ever got. So you let the buyer know that if you decide that you want to look at a property, one of these entry-only listings, the only way you're going to see them is through me, because other agents aren't going to show them, because they're not going to show you properties where we're only going to get 2.5% or $2.50. I will call that seller. I will confirm with them that they will pay my commission listed under 4A1. And if they give me a verbal commitment there, I will show you the property. If you like the property, we could draw up an offer, and I will enter into a commission agreement with that seller. Okay. We can either use the SP, single party compensation agreement, or as part of the purchase agreement, we can check a box in paragraph 3 and attach the SPBB, which will state that the seller agrees to pay my commission, so it will not cost you anything. But I cannot ask that seller to commit to paying my commission unless I have your permission to do that. And what this agreement does is it gives me that permission. Okay. The other thing I can do with this is, let's say you saw an open house years ago or months ago or whatever, and you really like that property. But of course, it's sold to somebody else now. But you really like that floor plan. If you were to give me that address, I can contact the title company. I'll give them the address of that, excuse me, the address of the property, and I will tell the title company to please pull the ownership with phone numbers of all the properties in that neighborhood that have the exact same square footage. We all know that when you go into model homes, each model has a specific square footage, right? That allows you to pull up just that floor plan, just that model. And then I can contact those 20, 25 property owners, however many there are that have that floor plan. And I don't even have to worry about the do not call list because I'm not soliciting for the listing. And this is what I would say to them. I would say, Mr. Property Owner or Ms. Property Owner, I see you have a Model B. I have a buyer under contract who has asked me to find one of those properties. I want to know if my buyer is interested in purchasing your property. Would you be interested in looking at an offer? And they might say, well, yeah. I mean, if you call 25 people, tell them you have a buyer who wants to look at their property, you're going to get at least 5 or 6 people to say, well, yeah. And they'll say, you're not asking for a listing? Say, no, I'm not asking for a listing. However, my buyer has asked would you pay my commission of 3%? Whatever you're going to charge. Now, what's that buyer going to say? What's that seller going to say, or that property owner? What's that FSBO going to say? Wait a minute. I listen to all these commercials on TV. What do agents charge? Well, those commercials on TV all say what? 6%. This is 3%. What do we know about for sale by owners? Two things. They're cheap and they have a hidden fear. They don't know what they're doing, right? Well, if you approach a property owner or a for sale by owner and you offer to get their property sold at a commission that is like half of what they would have to charge or have to pay if they listed the property with an agent, they're going to be excited about that. And you're addressing their hidden fear. That for sale by owner, that property owner, they don't know what they're doing. And they know they don't know what they're doing. But now they have an agent involved in the transaction. And the agent does know what they're doing, right? Let me leave you one final point with 4A1, and I'm going to go into the chat. You're probably going to be showing this buyer properties on the MLS. So the MLS will offset whatever they have to pay. At least that's what you're going to tell the buyer. But this agreement also allows you to show them properties that they never would have seen. Those entry-only listings that they're offering $2.50 for sale by owners, off-market properties. Would the buyer ever have seen those without signing this agreement? And the answer is no. So the only way a buyer would ever risk having to pay a commission is if they decide to buy a property that they never would have seen. But before you show them the property, you will tell them what the commission situation is. And I've never seen a seller, when given the opportunity to have an agent help in the transaction for less money, refuse it. All right. Let me go into the chat now. Okay. Okay, so just chit chat going along, no questions regarding the form. Now, as we move on to the next section, okay, broker's right to compensation. Now, you'll see under B1, non-exclusive. What does that mean? Well, the contract has been written to be non-exclusive, which means if you show the buyer a property and they make an offer on that property, you're entitled to a commission. But if they see a property with another agent or they go to an open house, then they don't owe you a commission. However, if you check the box under B2, now you have exclusive representation. That means if this buyer buys a property during this agreement, they owe you a commission, okay? If they buy a property during this agreement, they owe you a commission. We call that exclusive representation, right? So I recommend you use B2, all right? If you're going to go to the trouble of getting this contract signed, you might as well get the best protection. Likewise, if you take a listing, do not take an open listing. Take an exclusive right to sell. Now, the next item is C, cancellation. And unfortunately, under C1, if you have the non-exclusive, either party can cancel without notice. Well, that sucks. But if you have an exclusive, the party has to give you 30 days to cancel. Okay, well, that's better, but you know, I like it better the way we have it with our listing agreement, exclusive right to sell. That's why I say check C2. They cannot cancel. Okay, the only way this agreement can be terminated is by mutual agreement, just like you have with an exclusive right to sell. So under B2, check that box, making this exclusive. And under C2, check that box so they cannot just cancel on their own. The only way this can cancel before expiration is by mutual agreement. All right. Now, this gets a little dicey, okay? So under D1, as I mentioned earlier, it says if anyone other than the buyer compensates broker for services covered by this agreement, that amount shall be credited towards the buyer's obligation to pay. So when you're talking to your buyer, okay, that buyer is assuming by what they read in the media that the commission that you're putting in there is typically what you receive through the MLS. Now, it's not always that case, right? Might be more, might be less. Let's say hypothetically you put in the commission amount 3%, and they're in the MLS, they're only offering 2.5%. Well, under this agreement, would the buyer contractually owe 0.5%? And the answer is yes, they would. My recommendation is, if you are happy receiving that 2.5% through the MLS like you normally would, then you waive that 0.5% that the buyer would have to pay if you put 3% in this agreement. But I still like 3% in this agreement because you're going to be working a little harder if you got a for sale by owner or an unlisted property. In other words, there's no agent on the other side to do the other half of the work, right? D2 says if you put 3% in this agreement, but the MLS is offering you 4%, you get to keep the 4%. Unless under D2, you check that box on the right and you're going to credit it back to buyer. I don't recommend that. Okay, you work really hard for your commission. There's no reason why you should be rebating your commission back to the buyer. I mean, think about it. You're paying the buyer to work with you. Hello? I've never paid anybody so I can work for them. Okay, that doesn't work in my book. Okay. Then D3 allows you to include your commission in the offer by the buyer to the seller. Purchase agreement has been changed in December in paragraph 3, G3, I believe it is. You can check that box, and that would add the SPBB to provide for commission to you from the seller. Okay. So again, these forms have been reworked in December to assure your commission. All right. Now here's the safety clause. Now the way the safety clause works is you've got to put the number of calendar days there under 4E that this safety clause will be for. So remember earlier I said we're dealing with a buyer. We're not real comfortable about entering this agreement with you because they don't want that long commitment. So you only make this agreement for 1 day or maybe 2 days, whatever. Then here, you're going to put in the number of calendar days that the safety clause will run. In other words, after the expiration of this agreement, either tonight or tomorrow, if that buyer buys one of the properties that you showed them today or discussed with them today, they will still owe you a commission if they buy that property within blank calendar days. So what number should we put in there? Well, certainly no less than 30 days, right? I would be more comfortable with going with like 45 days or 60 days. Let's see, Ms. Vasquez, would you mind muting yourself? We can hear you. Okay, I'm going to have to mute her. Can't mute her. Zamora Vasquez, please mute yourself. We can hear you. Thank you. Okay, so put in 45 days or 30 days, whatever you think it needs to be, okay? So this is how we work it. You showed them 3 or 4 properties today. You have 5 days from the expiration of this agreement to notify them of the properties they've seen, okay? I wouldn't wait those 5 days. I do it today. After we say goodbye today, I'm going to go back to my office, we get on my computer, and I'm going to type them an email. It's going to go something like, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I want to thank you again for allowing me the opportunity of showing you properties today. Wanted to confirm the properties we saw were," and then you're going to list them. If you have any questions about these properties, please let me know. I will follow up with you in a couple of days to see where we are. Thank you very much. Ed Estes, Mount Sac Realty. Soon, send it. If you don't want to use email, you can do a letter in the US mail. C.A.R. actually does have a form that you can use for that as well. I think a personal email or a letter is a little bit more touchy-feely, because what we're going to try to do is reestablish that relationship with this buyer in a couple of days. And in 2 or 3 days, when we meet with them again, we're going to bring out the agency form, the BRBC form, this contract again, and have them sign everything. And they're going to look at it and say, "Didn't we already sign this?" And you said, "Yeah, but we only made it for 1 day. We have to sign this every time we go out?" No, I can make it for a week, 2 weeks. What do you feel comfortable with? You see, once they get used to working with you, I don't think they're going to have a problem making this agreement for a longer period of time. Now, when you take a listing, right? How long do you take a listing for with a seller? Maybe like 6 months, right? But if you have a ready, able, willing, motivated buyer, and you take them out and start showing them properties, assuming you're showing them properties they are interested in, how long till they make an offer? I would say within a few days, right? So the term of this agreement is typically going to be shorter than a listing agreement. Yes, you can make it for 1 day. Excuse me. You could make it for 30 days. You can make it for 6 months. But I'm thinking 3 or 4 weeks is about the term that most people use these agreements for, because that buyer is hopefully going to be going into escrow within 2 or 3 weeks if there's something out there that they want to buy. All right. Moving on. Now we go to page 2. And at the top of page 2, it says that we are going to disclose to the buyer, before we write an offer, what our commission is. And that's only right, correct? Because if less is offered to us than what the buyer is agreed to pay us under this agreement, they could end up paying the difference. Now, if you have a situation where hypothetically you have 3% in this agreement, but you only have 2.5% through the MLS, the buyer would owe that 0.5% difference. You need to have a discussion with your broker or your manager on what your policy is on commission. Because if you and other agents in your office are willing to accept that 2.5% commission if you don't have a buyer representation agreement with your buyer, then you would be penalizing your buyer for signing this agreement and giving you their loyalty by trying to go after them for that extra 0.5%. So my philosophy would be, if you would typically accept that 2.5% through the MLS, then you waive that additional 0.5%. You could do that in writing before the buyer makes their offer. All right. Now, you can check the box there in F1 that says that you will disclose it before you show them property. I recommend you do disclose it before you show them property, but I don't like checking that box because sometime in the excitement and the confusion of looking at different properties, you may forget to disclose the commission, okay? You might forget. So to avoid that error, leave with the default language, you'll disclose it before the buyer makes an offer. And you can do that one of two ways. You can either give them a copy, the client copy of the listing that shows the commission, and should be in your MLS an extended client copy that does show your commission, or you can use a new form that came out in December, the C.A.R. form ABCD. Okay, either one of those forms will work. The timing of your commission is close of escrow, or if buyer defaults, in other words, doesn't perform after releasing contingencies, they at that time would owe the commission. Or if the seller defaults and the buyer sues the seller, you can collect half of what the buyer collects, not to exceed your commission. Okay. H, payment will be through escrow, and the buyer does irrevocably assign the commission to you, just like we have in the listing agreement. And also says that if the buyer has a pre-existing obligation to pay or work with another agent from another agreement earlier, that needs to be disclosed back in paragraph 2 that we discussed earlier. Now we go into paragraph 5. That is our agency relationships. Remember, we have to give that AD form before they sign this contract under the law. And then under this contract in 5B, we will have given that BRBS form before they sign this agreement. So this agreement requires the use of the BRBS form. Civil Code 2079 requires that you give the agency disclosure form. So paragraph 6 is our authorization and obligations to represent and advocate on behalf of the buyer. Also states what we will not do. Okay, we don't determine the price the buyer pays. We offer information, we offer counseling, but what the buyer pays, whether the buyer wants to buy the property or not, is their decision. Likewise, the buyer has an obligation to act in good faith with us, to be honest with us. They are going to sit down with a lender within 5 calendar days and get themselves pre-approved or pre-qualified. They are going to read all documents, and they are going to seek assistance from appropriate professionals, like say a property inspector before they buy the property. Okay. D, they are going to pay for any reports, investigations that they would order and read them. E, if there are any features that a property can't have or must have, they're going to disclose those to us. And the form we would use for that is the BMI, buyer material issues. You're probably not familiar with that form. The only place it's ever used is in the buyer representation agreement. But it is a form where the buyer can state something the property has to have. Maybe they want fire sprinklers, or something the property can't have. Maybe they don't want a wood roof, okay, because of fire concerns. And then buyer does agree to indemnify, defend, and hold us harmless for any incorrect, incomplete, or inaccurate information that they provide to us. If there's a legal dispute, each party will shoulder their own attorney's fees, okay? With the one exception is, if a party refuses to participate in mediation, then if the other party wins, that party can recover their attorney's fees from the losing party because the losing party refused to participate in mediation. See, mediation is a mandatory part of this contract. Have any questions on mediation, you can put in the chat. I think most of us are pretty much comfortable with it, but mediation is a mandatory part. And if the other side refuses to mediate and we win, then we can collect our attorney's fees from them. And then over on page 3, again, the conclusion of the mediation terms. Certain items are exempt from mediation. The most notable is small claims. If you have a small claims action, you go straight to Judge Judy, right? Because you'll probably be on the docket within 45 days anyway. No sense to try to do a mediation. If you want to include arbitration into this agreement, you can do so with the ARB form, okay? And then paragraph 10 is our advisories and addendas. You can see those are listed there. And then 11 other terms. So if you are going to make this for one day, okay, you can specify up there at the beginning of the agreement that it is for one day. And then you can clarify it here that this agreement will end at midnight, February 3rd, or whatever day it is. Okay, so that's what C.A.R. Legal and I came up with earlier this week. Paragraph 12 says this is the entire agreement. Okay, there are no other agreements out there. If you need to attach the RCSD for entity buyers, normally that's when you have multiple entities, you can. However, paragraph B for the buyer signature already has a place if you have an entity. An entity is like a trust or an LLC. So you would put the name of the entity there in that second line where it says printed name of buyer, the Mount SAC LLC. Signature by, that's where you would sign your name. In the third line, you'd check that box and print your name, in my case, Ed Estes, and my title, managing member. Okay, so remember, if you're representing an entity, a trust, an LLC, or corporation, it is that trust, LLC, or corporation that is the buyer. But then you have to identify the representative of the buyer, printed form. They would sign their name, and then you would have to put the title showing their authority, managing member, president, trustee, whatever it is for the entity. All right. Let's go into the chat, see what we got. So far, no more questions, just looking for the handouts. Okay, I like that. Sounds like I'm doing an okay job answering your questions. Okay. So a couple of other forms, buyer transactional advisory. This is simply a disclosure form, similar to what you see at the end of the purchase agreement, okay? Advising them of the buyer's obligations. Here is the new ABCD form, okay? Where you can disclose how much commission you're receiving through the MLS on this deal, or if you're getting paid directly by the seller, say a for sale by owner or an unlisted property, all right? And then remember I said that I like to send an email or a letter to my buyer after we show them properties, listing those properties that we saw. C.A.R. has a form for that if you want to use the form. Some people are more comfortable using a form. I'd rather use a letter or an email. There's always a chance that the buyer, I call this the snotty buyer, they might say to you, you know, under that safety clause, if we show us a property today, that means we have to buy that property from you. And I would respond to that nicely and say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if I'm able to find the property that you want to buy today, I would hope that you would give me the honor of representing you on that property. Is there a reason you're not comfortable doing that? Well, we just don't know. Okay, there's your red flag right there. This buyer doesn't want to give you a commission. This buyer wants you to go out there and waste their time, and they're not going to let you write the deal. So one of the things that this agreement does is this agreement forces the buyer to commit that they are a legitimate buyer and they're prepared to let you represent them and that you can collect a commission in this transaction. So remember, the buyer is reluctant to signing, make the agreement for one day and register all those properties under the safety clause. In most cases, the seller's going to pay the commission. Sellers are used to paying the commission. Sellers are receiving all the money, right? I mean, if you have a seller that's fighting you on that, then just bring the offer in a little higher. So the seller pays the commission after consulting with your buyer, right? The only way a buyer would ever risk paying a commission is if they decide that they want to buy a property that they never would have seen unless they assign this agreement. Because if a buyer doesn't sign this agreement, you're not going to show them for sale by owners. You're not going to call up property owners whose property is not listed to see if they want to buy, right? You're probably not going to show them properties where the only compensation in the MLS is $2.50. But let me tell you, those sellers whose property is in the MLS and only $2.50 is being offered, they're not getting any showings. You're the first agent to call to show their property. They are thrilled. They're excited. And when you ask them before you show the property, hey, will you pay my commission of whatever? They're going to say yes, because they're trying to sell their property and nothing's happening. And they're not real thrilled with their agent. Call their agent first, get permission, call the seller, confirm your commission that the buyer is asking that you get from them. If they give you a verbal, you're good to go because your buyer cannot get around you. Your buyer can't contact them directly because you have the buyer under a buyer representation agreement. The BRBC allows you to show all properties, listed, not listed, for sale by owners, everything, providing greater service to your buyers. And finally, it protects your commission. All right. Don't see any questions in the chat. What I'm going to do now is I am actually going to stop the share. Okay. And I'm going to take us off recording. So we are now off recording, I think. Okay. And if you have any questions that you weren't comfortable putting in the chat, if you'd like to have a role play or a dialogue with me on any concerns that you would have about presenting this agreement to the buyer, I invite you to talk to me now. All right. Just unmute yourself and fire away. Anybody? Doesn't sound like it. For those of you who may be watching the recording, you've seen my my email address there in the slide. I welcome you to shoot me an email and we can discuss on email or by phone call and talk about scripts, talk about objections, things of that nature. All right. I want to thank all of you for participating. I thought we had a good meeting. Good luck out there. Hope all of you have a good weekend. And think about the Mount SAC real estate program if you know anybody who's thinking about entering the real estate business, because I think hopefully by now you'll agree with me that they will learn more in my real estate principles class than they would learn in a correspondence class. Our spring semester starts on Tuesday, March 21st. I actually have a live 9:30 to 1 o'clock principles class. We still have some openings there for people that want to sign up. We also offer a practice class Thursday morning. So it's a great way to take both those classes. So if you have any family members or stuff like that, that thinking about getting a real estate license, I'd love to have them in my class. Thank you very much. And again, have a great weekend.